Welcome, everybody, to a very special Narrative Live. I always say that it's very special, but it always is very special because how often do we get to have Ann P. Mitchell and Ellie Leonard in the same space together? Hi, guys. How are you?
Great.
Hey, I'm doing well.
I haven't seen your hair like that before. You normally go all up, Ann, so it's nice to see it.
I know. I decided to
Let's
go
see it down.
wild today.
Is this going wild?
Did I throw you off?
And Ellie, you look so country, I would say.
I know. I have my overalls. I was like, I'm just very stereotypical today. But yeah, I'm finishing up our time out of town, and then, I've had the most severe FOMO watching everybody do their live streams while we're here. But I am ready to hop back in a couple of days, and we'll be home.
I'm so glad you're here because. Sorry, go ahead, Ann.
I was just saying she's a little bit country. She's a little bit rock and roll.
She is, isn't she? Last week on Friday, Ann and I went through this new email. It wasn't new because it had been in the Epstein files for 6 months or so, but it was new to me in any event and new to any other reporters that I think that have, many rumors have been spreading around about Bill Barr and other people being involved in the Epstein files. But in this case, we have now documentary proof from inside the DOJ, which says, what we've all suspected, that in fact, Bill Barr is not just the attorney general who presided over the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, but also the attorney general who presided over the death of Jeffrey Epstein, but he may also have been part of the network that Epstein was involved in. That is big news because he is potentially not only conflicted, but may have even been involved in the cover-up of the Epstein arrest and murder, and in fact the entire case. And all of that, of course, makes us question Todd Blanche. If you think about Pam Bondi being one attorney general who had to give up her job because of the Epstein files, Todd Blanche may be a second if this continues to bubble the way it's looking. And Bill Barr, who was able to escape this all while he was attorney general, may finally need to be questioned about what his involvement was in the Epstein files and in the Epstein network. We'll show you the email in a second. And then you labeled it the smoking gun email, Ann, which I thought was adventurous, but also probably quite true because we've never really seen a document like this. And on the other hand, it's a smoking gun about what? Is it the smoking gun about the cover-up, or is it the smoking gun of the Epstein files?
Well, I think we're not exactly quite sure what we have yet. I also want to just quickly say both Lev and Dean are in the audience, so having two women on apparently draws them out. but hey guys, great to see you. So what we have here is, we can say for certain, is a smoking gun that someone within the system believed that the rumors, so to be clear, we have evidence of rumors. We don't have evidence of actual actions, but they believed these rumors to be substantial enough to merit being discussed. Curiously, on the same day that Blanche was in there interviewing Maxwell. So Zev, you and I have discussed that we think perhaps this was basically a cheat sheet of things that either things to stay away from during that interview or things to ask her about during that interview.
Right. There's a lot of correlation between what is in this email and what was asked of Ghislaine Maxwell. And I'm so glad Ellie's here today because she has transcribed every single word of the Ghislaine Maxwell interview that Todd Blanche did with her. And so you can recall, I hope, a lot of a lot of what she said. That particular interview was not really a legal thing. I mean, it was legal in that it happened, but it happened under unusual circumstances. He asked her a lot of very soft questions. She basically denied knowing about everything. And then a few days later or weeks later was upgraded into very cushy new prison facilities in Texas. I mean, it seemed almost a slam dunk from everyone's perspective that she gave Blanche what he wanted and he gave her what she wanted.
Well, and if you look at the timeline, now that we know that they had this meeting in the Situation Room in July, this was a week after that meeting in the Situation Room that he sat down and met with Ghislaine Maxwell, and then it was a week after that she was moved to Bryan, Texas. So if you listen, go ahead.
No, that's a very good point. I think that Situation Room meeting is very important, and it's escaped my mind to tell everyone what happened in that meeting because it sets up the whole sequence of events.
Yeah, so they had the meeting in the Situation Room, which was made public by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan in their book, where they said that in July of 2025, there was a very high stakes meeting with all of Trump's cabinet, except for Donald Trump, where they went over what the heck to do about the Epstein files because they started to realize that they couldn't get around it. They couldn't, continue to give us empty binders. Um, and the main kicker out of that meeting was we have to do something about Ghislaine Maxwell. What do we do? Do we give her a pardon? Do we question her? Do we give her a proffer? And they decided to go with proffer. And so 1 week later, they sat down with her to do this 2-day interview. And in the interview, I mean, it's a the reason I transcribed it is because I never really trust a DOJ transcription. They always tend to miss stuff. And so I wanted to kind of re-listen to it and get the things that they missed, which there were several. But I also wanted to hear the tone of Todd Blanche's voice as he asked the question and Ghislaine Maxwell. And it was lots of softball. It was lots of her, she'd start to say something and then she'd bring up 9/11 and how hard and traumatic 9/11 was for her. And they'd go down, this rabbit hole of, oh, poor you on 9/11. And then there would be points when she'd actually start to say something and Todd Blanche would steer her away. Like, that's not what we're going to talk about here.
Yep.
And so it was clear. I mean, everything was so intentional. And they named survivors who were supposed to be redacted and who were supposed to be Jane Doe's. And it was just really messy. But then a week later, she was moved from a low security prison to a minimum security prison. And where she is now, there are no sex offenders. She is the only sex offender at that facility. And the people there are supposed to have a maximum of 5-year sentence. She has a 20-year sentence. So clearly, this is not where she's supposed to be.
So let's try to build that timeline a little bit further. You've got them having that meeting in the Situation Room a week before. Then comes this July 24th, 2025 email. Now, we don't know who the sender of this email is. We do not know who the recipient of this email is. But you can sort of deduce as you're reading it who it's intended for. So this is the morning of the interview with Todd Blanche already in Tallahassee. He is going to start his interview with her at around 10 a.m. that morning. At 7:49 a.m., the email is first sent out. A DOJ official is asking, write me a sentence or two on the salacious statements of some of the key names mentioned in the Epstein files. And then within 2 hours, they get the response. And the reply, a roster of the accused with the last name on it was Bill Barr. We'll get into that in just a second, but I just want to keep in everyone's mind, while we don't know the sender and we don't know the recipient, boy, this timeline makes you think that it was a preparation for Todd Blanche. The other thing that makes you think that is everybody on this list are people that were asked about in the interview with Ghislaine Maxwell. So when we go through the list, you'll see that every single person has someone mentioned as Todd Blanche asks Ghislaine Maxwell about in the interview, except for Howard Lutnick. That's the only exception, which she does mention on a sidebar, I guess, by saying that there are people in the cabinet that are potentially incriminated. So that timeline,
I was just going to say something really quick. Something that's really interesting, and if you just do a search of this in the interview, if you see the specific names that she's asked about, and you can time the amount of time they discuss that person and the number of questions that Todd Blanche asks about that person, it's very clear that they do not want to talk about Donald Trump. That is the shortest timeline and the fewest number of questions that are asked in that circumstance. She nips it in the bud. She says he's a great guy. They walk away from it immediately. Whereas Bill Clinton has a long list of questions, and it is a long timeline that they continue to come back for in the interview. Sorry.
And Bill Barr is not someone they spend a lot of time on, Anne.
No. And also, I mean, I think that's such a great point, Ellie. And also, it's important to remember in the context of she is under oath. And not only is she under oath, but she is preparing to file, or in fact, she may have already filed her habeas petition. So she has to be even more careful, and she has to make sure, because she's trying to still say that she should, at minimum, get a new trial. And so she's being extremely careful to tiptoe around the Trump thing. I have no doubt. One of the things that I was curious about, and we may never know, is whether this document went with Blanche to Maxwell and he showed it to her and said,
Mhm.
here are the points we have to be really careful about. Whether he showed it to her, before the interview started, and we keep saying interview, but it really was basically a deposition and it was under oath. So I would, that's just something that went through my head, is that this could have been a document not only to prepare Blanche, but to prepare her.
There's actually 7 minutes of them that is off the record
Mhm,
before the interview
mhm.
starts. So what did they discuss in those 7 minutes? Who knows? But and as Lev Parnas pointed out last week here on the show, the attorney for Ghislaine Maxwell is a very close friend of Todd Blanche. So there might have been some other, backdoor kind of diplomacy done ahead of this in order to align what she was going to say with what he was going to ask.
I would
So
be very curious as to, depending on the actual relationship between those two attorneys, I'd be curious whether Maxwell and indeed the government signed a waiver of conflict of interest.
good question. Good question. I didn't know the answer to that, but that is a really good question. So this is the thing, and we went through this last week. We don't have to go through it again, but I really want everyone to focus on what it says around Bill Barr, which is the last name mentioned here. And it says, and I can't even read this, I'm sorry, but that he was at the Epsteins for a model event. He ran into Barr, who stated he wanted to see her next time he came. So this is Barr, this is someone, a redacted person in a witness statement saying that she saw Barr at a model event and that he said he wanted to see her next time he came. At another point, Epstein asked if she had ever met Barr. And then NTOC redacted claimed she was a victim of Epstein and that Barr was present during some of his abuse. And somewhere else in this email, I think in the original request for these things, it actually asks if they could include any statements about him being present at the rape of somebody. So the William Barr at the top here, it says William Barr for being present when a girl was raped. And that would be a criminal event, obviously, if he was present when someone was raped, anybody raped. Specifically, if it was underage, it would be worse, but it doesn't make a difference. There's a rape is a rape. And if the Attorney General was witness to that, that would be a significant thing. I'm guessing, Anne, but I'm right?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. And I'm not a criminal law attorney, but I, did take crim law in law school. And, if you're a witness to a crime, there are times when it rises to the level of you committing a crime if you don't report it. And
Right.
I would guess that this would be the case, given that the person was likely a minor. But I really don't know for certain.
But this level of involvement, if it's true, we don't know if it's true, but if it's true, this level of involvement of being, connected to the models who remember seeing him, making dates with them, asking if she had ever met Barr, as Epstein did of one person, and then being present at this abuse. That's not something we had known before. At least I hadn't known before. It seemed pretty remarkable that we had found out at this stage that the man responsible for the arrest and the man who oversaw the investigation into the death of Jeffrey Epstein was also part of the network. Ellie?
I just think, when you think of the people who are involved with Epstein along his life, you have the post 2008 conviction, and they're kind of more these transactional, political, global leaders, these people he wants in his Rolodex that have sort of come and go. But then you have these people who are around since the very beginning. You have like Leslie Wexner, you have Ehud Barak, you have these very early relationships, Robert Maxwell, that he develops. And what you need to remember is if William Barr knew Epstein on a personal level, he would have met Jeffrey Epstein when he was 21 years old, when Jeffrey Epstein was 21 years old, because Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr, hired Epstein to work at the Dalton School. And so that was their first connection. And again, we have to say, well, why did he hire him to work at the Dalton School? He was unqualified. He didn't have a college degree. This is now I think a $70,000 a year K-12 school in New York City. So very, very private, wealthy. He would have known him the longest out of most of his relationships. And so to say that he was around for some of these things is not unlikely. Again, we do need to get that evidence, but he, we have these sort of sketchy early relationships that are kind of foggy, these timelines where Epstein sort of disappears off the map in the 80s. Barr knew him before all that. He knew him during all that.
Such a good point.
And so he knows more about Epstein than most people, and so the likelihood that their relationship would be deeper and more conflicted, as far as him going to jail and being in charge of what happens to him in jail, it's concerning to say the least.
It's really interesting. I've done a lot of research into the early relationship of Bill Barr and Jeffrey Epstein. It goes back to 1974, when, you're right, Donald Barr hired Epstein at Dalton. At the time, Bill Barr was already working as a young recruit at the CIA, stationed in New York, by the way, and doing some sort of undercover work in Columbia University, which is just an interesting side note, but because the CIA shouldn't be doing that. But this is exactly the same time as the contemporary, age-wise at least. Jeffrey Epstein was suddenly working at Donald Barr's school. Did they intersect? Hard to say, but they were both in New York at the same time. Two young guys, I don't know, both landed up in intelligence operations, both landed up linked to a variety of things later on, as we'll show you. So, it's not just a hiring at a school. It's hiring at a school by a former OSS agent and the father of someone working at the CIA. And it's not just that he was working at the CIA. He was working directly for George Herbert Bush, doing an important job. This was after Watergate that he landed up becoming the CIA liaison to Congress, a very big rise and sudden rise for the young Bill Barr. And this is, as the Pike Commission was busy tearing apart the black ops operations of the CIA and making it illegal to do those things, Bill Barr was the liaison to Congress, making him a very important figure. And that, of course, all led to Iran-Contra. And we've, if anyone read The Greatest Heist, Book 1, you would have known that is the origin point where we find both Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, Adnan Khashoggi, Bill Barr. It all happens right there in the start of Robert Maxwell at the start of the Iran-Contra affair. And all of that flows directly from Watergate into that moment. So when we look at Epstein's broader network of espionage activity and beyond just the human trafficking, there is a lot of connection between Bill Barr and Jeffrey Epstein in the early days on an espionage intelligence level. And it certainly brings back the CIA into a conversation around Epstein that I think is one that some people have been trying to have.
He was involved with intelligence and all sorts of different people. Like, you think of Leslie Western, you think of Robert Maxwell, and then all of a sudden, when he's fired from the Dalton School, Punch Sulzberger wants to hire him for the New York Times, and Ace Greenberg wants to hire him for Bear Stearns, and all these things that, again, he's not qualified. And then all of a sudden, over the next 10 years, he becomes a very, very wealthy millionaire out of nowhere. And so none of this is coincidence. We just have to figure out how it happened. But that intelligence thread keeps popping up. He keeps working with people in intelligence. And it's like, why is this, numbnuts from Coney Island all of a sudden involved with all these people who happen to have a connection to intelligence? That's not a coincidence.
Not a coincidence.
Well, including, I just want to point out, because Ellie's absolutely right, that the dinner with Epstein that we did, God, was it last year already? Where he was in this secret 3-hour meeting, which we have the recording, where it included Ehud Barak, who at the time was the sitting defense minister of Israel, and you don't have that kind of connection with someone such as Epstein unless they are a trusted asset. So,
And of course, his ties to Russia go back a long way. We've certainly shown those in various investigations. Epstein was very connected to Russia. So, many people have said he was a broker for many intelligence agencies. Certainly, you see the CIA, you see the Israeli military intelligence, you see the Russian intelligence, all connected to Epstein. And Barr's an unusual figure. I want to talk a little bit about the sweetheart deal in 2008, Anne, because that was done through Kirkland and Ellis, which is also Bill Barr's former law firm, and a very sort of CIA-ish kind of law firm. And a lot of people who landed up involved in the sweetheart deal, I'm thinking about Acosta in particular, landed up working at Kirkland and Ellis after they left office.
So when you say sweetheart deal, are you referring to what we call the non-prosecution agreement?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just I want to make clear for the audience that it's the same thing. And yeah, it's absolutely true. There is, that circle of people are still very, they were there then. Some of them are still here now, and it's just it's not even really surprising at this point, right? People have coined the term the Epstein class. We call it, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same people. And then going back to Zev, or maybe it was Ellie, who said, about Maxwell saying in her interview, quote unquote interview with Epstein or with Blanche, that some of the people who are in that circle are in your cabinet. They're people you call friends. And that was clearly, a pointer to Lutnick. But I want to bring up something that I only just now sort of really, remembered, because it's been quite a while. But, first of all, the timing of this email that we're discussing is right around the exact same time that the FBI, DOJ, SDNY, whoever else, whatever other, number or letters, put out that slideshow of the Epstein slideshow, right? Which I think we've all seen. And that slideshow and this email track completely. And at first I thought, and Zev, I think you and I discussed that we thought maybe that the email was based on the slideshow, but now based on the timing, because that email came out, July 24th, right? It was sent. And the slideshow talks about events that happened slightly after. So one of the things it says is Blanche Maxwell interview, July 24th, July 25th. So
yes, that was after the fact.
Right. So what I think now is that email, I mean, one possible, even likely scenario is that email was the result of like Blanche or one of his people saying, hey, send us over what you got for the thing that you're preparing for that slideshow. And so in looking at the slideshow just now to refresh my own memory, I am reminded that there are a list of people on that slideshow who have received proffers from either the FBI or the SDNY. And there are a lot of names redacted. So number one, we need to get those names unredacted, because clearly they're not victims. If they are receiving proffers, and for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, a proffer is basically an agreement between either a suspect or a witness, somebody who is in some way implicated in or adjacent to an investigation. It's an agreement between them and a law enforcement agency that if you give us information, we promise not to prosecute you based on the information you give us. And the unredacted names include Les Wexner and Abigail Wexner and David Rogers and Larry Visosky and Glenn Maxwell, but there are 9 names that are redacted. So we still don't know. These are people identified by maybe Blanche, by the FBI as people of interest in the entire investigation.
Could they be these people? Could they be all these people that are listed here? I mean,
well, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, it's all conjecture, and like attorneys hate a conjecture, but the timing of it all and the names of it all, I just, I don't know, but it's something that makes you go,
Yeah, I mean, these 9 names, Ellie. I know it seems like you have to go somewhere. Am I correct?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I just on these 9 names. These are the 9 names that Epstein, that Blanche asks Ghislaine about, and it seems to me that can't be coincidence. That those 9 names are the names that he, minutes after this email is sent, he lands up asking questions of her, and she denies almost all of these people's involvement in any way. And we did a side by side on Friday, looking at some of the claims and the allegations about Bill Barr. She says she didn't even know him. Which now seems a little bit incredulous when you think about the statements that are made here about whether he was aware of some of these models, whether he was making dates with these models, whatever it is. It does seem like he had a greater presence there, especially because he knew Epstein for 45 years, that there would be something there.
Well, if he did, she would know, because before his first court case, she was in charge of his entire life. And that's what Sarah Kellen and some of these other women who were his assistants said, is she was completely in control of everything that went in and out of the house, every flight, every, scheduling, every person, every dinner. She knew about it. She scheduled it. It went through her because she wanted her name on the email. And then after that court case, then everything went through Jeffrey Epstein. So if they did have a relationship, she would have known about it.
This is the actual quote that Maxwell gives Blanche. Maybe your transcript is a little different from this one, but it says, Blanche, have you ever met the former Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr? Maxwell, no. Blanche, do you remember whether Mr. Epstein knew him or whether his name ever came up? I don't recall any. Which you mentioned, Anne, was one of those lines you use when you don't want to answer a question that might incriminate you. But this is remarkable. On the one hand, Blanche may have had evidence in front of him saying that there was potentially him as a witness present during some of the abuse, that he knew these models, that he wanted to see one of them. And yet, on the other hand, you've got Ghislaine saying he didn't even exist in that world. It's just no, one of these things can't be true. Any thoughts on that? Just to let me land. Let's go back to the 45 years then, because quickly, then we could wrap this up, because I think people are getting the point. The thing that strikes me and why Bill Barr is different than everybody else on that list is that Bill Barr is the guy who presided over the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein. You'll remember Jeffrey Berman was the head of the SDNY and had quite aggressively declared his independence from the federal department as he was investigating the Maxwell case in particular at the time. And Jeffrey Berman was not long for that job. I mean, he was fired quite unceremoniously by Donald Trump a few weeks after Barr took over that job, if I'm not mistaken. And then Barr takes over the pursuit of Ghislaine Maxwell, and takes it over directly. So not only do you have Barr there, I'm sorry, that timing doesn't make sense. So you got Barr was first appointed in December 2018. In March 2019 is the Mueller report, and in August is the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, and then a few weeks later is the death of Jeffrey. It might be in July was the arrest, and August was the death of Jeffrey Epstein. So he presided over two massive cover-ups in those first few months as the Attorney General for Donald Trump. One is the Mueller report. We all remember that his summary he issued, and then he presides over the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, and then the subsequent death of Jeffrey Epstein. And then he shows up 2 days after the arrest, and he says to a crowd in New Orleans that, and this is a comment that will always stick in my brain, because he says to them that not only, he said, that the co-conspirators of Epstein should not rest easy. And he said, we will get to the bottom of this. But the fact that he's saying that the co-conspirators should not rest easy, and he may be one of them, is quite something, because we haven't gotten to the bottom of what happened to Jeffrey Epstein and whether he was murdered, whether he committed suicide, whether he's alive. I think those questions are all sort of still open, because we have not had any answers, and all the evidence has disappeared, Ellie.
Well, we also have emails of intel that Epstein was getting about the Mueller report before it was released. So he had some kind of connection based on that specific report, which would lead me to believe he was still connected to Bill Barr at that time. And that was,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then he goes after Maxwell, and Barr takes over the investigation in the search for Maxwell himself, apparently. These are things that you would recuse yourself for under any circumstances, and none of this is normal business for him to stay involved in a case if he knew the people involved.
Well, I mean, yes, generally in normal circumstances, there would be, I don't know if he'd recuse himself, but certainly there would be an inference of a conflict of interest. But this, nothing under Trump is normal.
Yeah. But are we looking at a cover-up?
Yes. I mean, Bill Barr or everybody else on that entire list. Yes, we are looking at a cover-up.